On June 24th, 2025, we lost a champion of justice, courage, and love when J. Stannard Baker, Stan, died suddenly of a heart attack at age 79. Many admired Stan and his work, and many had the privilege of knowing him personally. I've gathered a few of us who knew him to pay tribute to Stan and to share with you what we saw in him, a man so worthy of respect and affection. I'm Debbie Ingram for Town Meeting TV. With me is former State Representative Bill Lippert, Episcopal Deacon Susan McMillan, and current and retired psychotherapist Xander Lodge and Sima Breiterman. Thank you all for being with me today. Let's begin with some facts about Stan's early life. Stan was born in Manhattan, Kansas, but spent much of his growing up years in Long Beach, California. When he was a rising senior at Millikan High School in Long Beach, he was elected as the school's rally chairperson, a role that was prescient as he seemed always to be organizing, motivating, and inspiring his peers. Stan was a 1968 graduate of Swarthmore College near Philadelphia, so he made his way from California to the Northeast as a young man. One of the draws to Vermont was that Stannard Baker was a descendant of some of the Green Mountain Boys who fought in the Revolutionary War. I can remember many times when he brought that up in conversation. His family had ties to the Vermont towns of Stannard and Bakersfield, in fact. Stan was brought up in the Unitarian Church and later regularly attended Quaker meetings. He switched church affiliations when he split with his wife Priscilla so that she could enjoy the support of that faith community on her own. His search for a new church home led him to the Episcopal denomination, and specifically to the Cathedral Church of St. Paul here in Burlington. So that brings us to Stan's very active role in the Episcopal diocese here in Vermont, as well as in the national setting of the Episcopal denomination. Susan McMillan, you knew Stan in this capacity. Could you tell us first about your own connection to the church?
Sure. I'm an ordained deacon in the Episcopal Church, and I'm assigned to be the diocesan liaison to Vermont Interfaith Action. I often served side by side with Stan at the cathedral, and sometimes I now travel around the state connecting with some of our smaller parishes and preaching there. My partner and I first met Stan and Peter in the early 2000s through the LGBTQ group at the cathedral. So I knew Stan as both a mentor and a friend.
Great. So you know firsthand what it's like to be a deacon in the Episcopal Church. Different denominations have different ministry roles. What is the role of an Episcopal deacon and how is that different from, say, a priest or a bishop?
So a quick primer, I guess. In the Episcopal Church, there are lay persons, bishops, priests, and deacons, all of us considered ministers of the church. Priests and bishops share in the administration and oversight of the church. Deacons, who serve after several years of formation, are ordained as clergy into a lifelong vocation. We are considered servant leaders, and we're called to bring the church out into the world and to bring the needs of the community back to the church. Deacons really do a million things, from visiting people in the hospital to starting programs for the unhoused to advocating at the State House. So we're called to be servants to the people. And I really think Stan believed this, that we are also called to be a pebble in the shoe of the church, constantly reminding the church of the needs of the people.
And so tell us about Stan's influence as a deacon, and then he was also an archdeacon later in Vermont, right?
Yeah. So Stan and Peter were among the first to have their civil union blessed in the Diocese of Vermont, and therefore they were really first in the country to have their civil union blessed in the Episcopal Church, and that was in August of 2000. As a member of the cathedral, Stan began his journey to become a deacon sometime in 2005. He was ordained in 2009, and he served primarily at the cathedral. Ultimately, he became a founding member of our School for Deacons. He was very active in Vermont Interfaith Action, as you know. He was a great advocate for Rock Point School. He became chaplain to the retired clergy in Vermont, and he was the archdeacon for formation. So that meant he was a mentor and teacher, encouraging others in their own ministries and leadership roles. And that's where he got the title of Venerable J. Stannard Baker, being the archdeacon. And from here on out, a lot of my words are going to be direct quotes from other people, so I'm just going to give that general credit. Stan was always respectful, and he never blindly deferred to authority. He didn't shy away from people in need or people who were considered outcasts. And he truly tried to follow Jesus' example of walking in love. A friend told me that Stan's sermons reminded her why she is Christian and inspired her to try to be a better one. He preached about marginalized groups, immigrants, LGBTQ folk, and he was always a strong advocate for women. He dealt with racism, homophobia, poverty, genocide, and this was all grounded in his belief that there was room for everyone at God's table. He helped teach hundreds of people about safe church practices and to keep our more vulnerable members always safe. And he was easy to talk to, even for kids. He sincerely cared and was passionate about the pastoral care of each person. And in all of his leadership roles, he was really more of a companion than the guy in charge.
And he also had a lot of influence at the national level, not just as a deacon in Vermont, right? He served for years on a national commission focused on liturgy and music, and he was a member of the National Executive Council. Those sound like important roles in the wider church. And so in what ways did he impact those?
They were important. He did become deeply involved in the wider church. The commission you mentioned, its name, the House of Deputies Legislative Committee on Prayer Book, Liturgy, and Music. It sounds kind of dry, but all of this work was really important to Stan. This meant he handled some of the most controversial questions that the church faces, questions around authorizing the rights for the marriage for same-sex couples, which was really controversial in the Episcopal Church. He also helped address if God should be referred to as He in our Book of Common Prayer. Early on, he was tasked with studying equal marriage in the Episcopal Church. He also advocated for full inclusion in the liturgy for people with autism spectrum disorder. He supported a resolution expressing the Episcopal Church's remorse for the irreparable harm done by indigenous boarding schools, some of which were run by the Episcopal Church. He was a 5-time clergy deputy at our triennial General Convention. And for the last year of his life, he was the only deacon on the Episcopal Church's Executive Council, which is the body that does much of the governing of the national church. So I know this sounds really in the weeds, but in all of this work, Stan was always pushing the church forward to welcome, embrace, and include everyone. He loved the church's liturgy, but he also knew that words were really important. So these efforts led to important changes that removed gender-specific language from our Book of Common Prayer and language that explicitly excluded people. So in a church built on tradition, this was really no small task. And a colleague told me, Stan managed all of this with great care, wisdom, and diplomacy. It was a huge turning point in the church's embrace of equality. And I was reminded last night as I thought about this, the quote, Martin Luther King's quote about the arc of the moral universe is long, but it tends towards justice. And I think in all of Stan's activities, his mission was always to bend the arc of our world towards justice.
And what gifts would you say he brought to that goal?
Stan believed no matter who you are, that you had both things to teach people and things to learn. I think the church is where Stan's life as a compassionate therapist and where he and Peter's role in the civil union fight, I think it's where these two passions really came together and flourished. He frequently gave credit to his Quaker upbringing, which I think taught him a great deal about listening. And it also taught him, I think, to question authority. One person told me that Stan could always see a level deeper than anyone else, and he could articulate things that other people could not. And he also believed that everyone at the table had something worthwhile to say. One of his gifts was an unusual capacity for complete presence with anyone he was with. He loved our liturgy and he loved the church, but mostly I think he loved people, and he wanted to share God's love with everyone. A friend of mine said it really well when I asked her why she appreciated Stan's sermon so much, and she said, Stan was always on the right side of Christianity.
And lastly, since you were one of his colleagues and you worked with him closely, what would you say Stan taught you or modeled for you personally?
I mean, Stan, he could be so serious. We all saw him accomplish so much, but he was a super fun guy, and he could lighten up a room. And he taught me that each of us have gifts to offer, and that I should follow whatever God was calling me to do. And just as I think he directed his own light to shine on and illuminate others rather than himself. By that example, he taught me to try to do the same thing. And I think mostly he taught me to love and to love and to love some more.
Thank you so much, Susan. So Stan's work life prior to and during his service in the church also encompassed many years as a psychotherapist, as the mental health director for the counseling service of Addison County, and as the clinical director for Howard Center Developmental Services, and in his own private practice. So Sima Breiterman, let's start with you. You knew Stan from his time at Howard Center in Developmental Services. What was your role there, and how did you interact with Stan?
Well, before I answer that, I'm actually very lucky. I knew Stan when we both worked also at the counseling service of Addison County. That's where I met Stan. And a little side story here, that when Stan and Peter got together, they were looking for an apartment to rent, and my partner and I were just vacating my apartment, and I told them about the apartment on High Street in Middlebury. They got the apartment, and we entitled it the Love Nest. And so we passed that on to Stan and Peter. In any case, at Howard Center, I remember when the clinical director for developmental services position became vacant, and Stan called me and said, asked, do you think I could do this job? And I was like, shocked by that question. And I said, Stan Baker, of course you can, please apply. And he did, and he joined us, I think this was like in 2002, when he worked with us in that capacity for about a little less than 12 years. And at the time, I was director of adult services, and our offices were 2 doors apart, which was very convenient for me because I had a nice access to Stan Baker. And in his role, I'll talk a little bit about what the role in developmental services was to oversee and ensure that clinical services were provided to adults with developmental disabilities. And he also, not only did he arrange for that, oversee the clinical services, but he also provided direct services to people with developmental disabilities, individual therapy, and he also led groups as well. And this was a little different for Stan, this population, to a certain extent. And but I mean, he just thrived in helping people, not only the people that with the developmental disability, but also his colleagues and staff. And I think one of the things that in his work as clinical director, that in his his service in terms of being a mentor, a coach, a supervisor, that I want to point out that's very different, that as a clinical supervisor, he wasn't only supervising people, he wasn't only supervising clinicians, he was supervising an array of people in different roles who were not clinicians. And he was able to meet them where they were at, whether it was a direct service professional, whether it was a residential staff person, whether it was a teacher or an employment trainer. He gave consultation and supervision to people in a variety of roles who did not have formal clinical training or experience. And I think that our staff, it was like this huge star appeared that was able to help people learn skills and be effective in their role, whatever it was.
Great. And what would you say was his maybe his primary impact then in this field, and maybe his legacy?
Well, you know, he shared and led our vision, and our vision of everyone matters. Every human being matters, no matter what their abilities or disabilities are, however they look, however they talk, however they walk, however they function every day. And he led that vision in a very strong way and demonstrated it every day in just his character and just how he showed up and how you said it, he loved people. And you could see that in Stan every day when he came to work and he was with us. He also had that very fun side to him. And not only were his clinical skills were so astute, and he really did raise the standard of care because of his strong clinical skills and experience. And he also had this fun side where whenever there was a time to celebrate or an opportunity to celebrate, sing happy birthday, we could always count on Stan to be one, the loudest singer, and in most situations, the best singer. And we looked to him for that. As simplistic as that may sound, people loved it when we were celebrating, and Stan was really taking the lead in the celebration. The other piece, again, along with his astute clinical skills, was his ability to write. And whenever anything needed to be written, whether quickly or long-term, we would rush to Stan. And Stan would sit at that computer and just type it out so fast, and it was always such an eloquent piece. So that's our Stan.
Uh-huh. And as his colleague, what do you feel he taught or modeled for you personally?
He really modeled hope. He modeled that no matter how hard a situation was that we were dealing with and trying to help with, that he was always hopeful, and he shared that we will know what's the best thing to do in this moment. And so that hopefulness was so clear in his being in that role, and I really took that from him, and it helped me a lot in terms of my profession and my outlook.
Yes, yeah. Thank you so much for those recollections.
My pleasure.
So Stan's psychotherapy work also included a private practice that he co-founded called BTR Psychotherapy. This practice flourished from 2013 to 2025. So we wanted to include his mentee and later colleague, Xander Lodge, to speak to that time in Stan's life. So Xander, can you tell us how you were connected to Stan and what kind of work you did in connection with him?
Yes, thanks for having me. You know, Stan, I first met Stan at Howard Center. I arrived at Howard Center as he was leaving, so we overlapped for a few months. And I had the opportunity to work with Stan due to the nature of my role at Howard Center at that time. I had to be in the room with Stan and his client to support that person. I got to watch Stan work for over a year, every week, and to do the work that he does, and participate in that as well, with him and this person. And it was so profound to be able to watch that, because there's not many opportunities for watching a psychotherapist do their work. It is what encouraged me, well, he encouraged me to go back to grad school. And I ended up going to St. Michael's College for a master's degree in clinical psychology, and now that's what I do. And Stan led the way.
And what population did Stan's private practice mostly focus on?
It was a mix. So Stan worked with a lot of people with intellectual disability and autism spectrum disorder, as was mentioned, and but really, like, he worked with people. He saw each individual person as having unique needs and having a unique personness to them, if that's a word, right? And he had this innate ability to see people and see, like, where they were hurting, what they needed, and how to meet them in their experience. Like, he just embodied empathy and love. Mm-hmm. And so he also did a lot of work around parenting, and parent coaching, and provided support to lots of children and families, and providing play therapy as well. But he carried the play therapy aspect of his work into his work with adults with intellectual disability and autism, and using concepts of psychodrama and play therapy to be creative in meeting the needs of people who think differently. Yeah.
And what impact would you say that he had on the field as a whole?
Yeah. The populations that he worked with are historically marginalized and forgotten, unfortunately, and previously, those populations may not have been considered as candidates for psychotherapy. Mm-hmm. And he sort of shattered that preconceived notion, and helped sort of lead the way to allow other clinicians to also work in our community serving those populations. There's a lot of clinicians out there that won't work with somebody carrying a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder or intellectual disability because they feel they lack the ability. But really, like, any individual is a person, and the work requires creativity.
And how would you describe his particular gifts or characteristics in his work?
With all of his life experience and his spiritual and religious work, he carried that into everything that he did. His gifts and ability come from meeting people where they're at, come from recognizing the people within our community that need the most support, and finding a way to reach more people that otherwise, might have slipped through the cracks.
And then finally, what would you say Stan taught you or modeled for you in your own life as a professional?
Yeah, I mean, he taught me how to be present in session. He taught me how to be, how to have empathy in a really authentic way, how to be with people, and how to meet people in their level of need, to see people as people, right, not as diagnoses. I mean, I already got that from my clinical training, but at the same time, like, he really reinforced that idea of, like, meeting people where they need to be, and adapting, you know, any particular approach to meet people's needs.
Thank you so much
Yeah.
for those memories. So in the early 1990s, Stan fell in love with Peter Harrigan, who went on to become a professor in fine arts, specializing in theater at St. Michael's College in Colchester. They moved into a townhouse in Shelburne together on Stan's 50th birthday in 1996, making sure there was plenty of room for Peter's renowned collection of Barbie dolls. That was very important to Peter and later to Stan as well. At this time, Stan and Peter heard about a group called the Vermont Freedom to Marry Task Force, which brought to light the fact that married couples were granted many protections and benefits by the federal government. At last count, over 1,100 such advantages that same-sex couples did not receive. In 1997, this group made plans to challenge marriage laws in the state of Vermont. They had 2 lesbian couples signed up already and were seeking a gay male couple. The plan was for the couples to try to get marriage licenses, and when they were turned down, as expected, they would file suit. And this is exactly what happened. Because Baker was the first name alphabetically in the suit, the case became known as Baker v. Vermont. And in a somewhat surprising turn of events, after a Superior Court judge dismissed the case and it was taken to the Vermont Supreme Court, that highest court in the state ruled that gay couples had the right to marriage or an equivalent, a parallel institution. And rather than the court setting something up, they sent it to the legislature to do the work. Now, former Representative Bill Lippert, this could have meant that marriage could have been made legal at that time. But you were in the House of Representatives on the Judiciary Committee, which was the committee in charge of sorting all this out. And you had also already met Stan, I believe, because of your background in psychotherapy. But anyway, let's concentrate first of all on the political legislative process that did not head toward marriage at that time. So please tell us what the thinking was on the committee in the year 2000.
Well, thank you. And first, I do want to acknowledge that I am one of the strengths, and we didn't publicize this widely, but I had known Stan for quite a number of years before he became the face of the Baker decision and of the Freedom to Marry lawsuit. And I was the vice chair of the House Judiciary Committee, which was given primary jurisdiction to address the Baker decision. The fact that we knew each other, we trusted each other, we had worked together, I think really strengthened our ability to be newly colleagues in this political firestorm that was happening. And it's important to know that, and Beth Robinson and I have both talked about it and joked about it, each of us, this was never coming to the legislature. I had promised more than a few of my colleagues who said, because it's hard to remember now, but it wasn't marriage equality back then, it was gay marriage. And the terminology shifted over time. And gay marriage was radioactive. It was beyond controversial. It's hard to remember now, but there were I think a majority of the states had passed constitutional amendments banning it. There were all kinds of, in Hawaii, the Supreme Court had granted marriage rights, but they amended their constitution to ban it. So when it was coming to Vermont, it was going through the courts. And Beth said, "Don't worry, Bill, it will never come to the legislature. We are doing this through the courts." And I reassured my colleagues who were terrified. They seriously, I was the only openly gay member of the legislature, House or Senate, and they approached me numerous occasions, said, "Bill, promise we'll never have to vote on gay marriage." I said, "Not to worry, Beth Robinson has it covered." And Stan and Peter and the other litigants are, working their way through the court system. And then, bam, in December of 1999, the Vermont Supreme Court said, you are entitled to all the, same-sex couples are entitled to all the rights, privileges, and responsibilities of the marriage statutes. But it will be up to the legislature to determine whether or not, whether the marriage statute will be opened to same-sex couples, or whether there will be some as yet undetermined legal structure that might be able to grant satisfactory privileges, responsibilities, etc. Well, it was a bomb that went off, and my colleagues said, "Bill, you promised." So I look from the perspective of 2025. I look back and go, we did move toward marriage equality, what we now call marriage equality, but I had a different role than Stan had. And I think that helped because freedom to marry folks were advocates. They were determined, and they organized grassroots movement all across Vermont, powerful grassroots movement. I, on the other hand, being the only openly gay member of the legislature, became the focus of lots of people's attention, positive and negative. But I was a legislator and not just an advocate. I was made it clear that I was in support of marriage, or gay marriage equality, but I also knew enough. I'd been there a few years at that point and dealt with some other controversial issues, and frankly, I was not at all convinced that there would be enough votes for marriage. You need to remember, people forget this, but there was not marriage equality for same-sex couples anywhere in the world. People constantly saying, "Oh, but it was in Canada and it was in the Netherlands. Why didn't you just do that?" Well, it wasn't anywhere. And the focus was on us. And the focus was on Stan and Peter and the litigants. But particularly because Stan, as he so carefully said, and I think it's consistent with what others have said about Stan's personality, it's the Baker decision, but he wasn't the primary litigant. He was the named litigant. And he would use that phrase saying, "I'm Baker of the Baker decision. I am the named litigant." And at the same time, he and Peter, because he was Baker of the Baker decision, were in both the hot seat for those who were determined that marriage equality would not survive in Vermont. And even once we created civil unions, which granted everything except marriage by name and divorce, there were 4 words different. People don't realize that, but there were only literally 4. Well, we added a 5th because we said you couldn't get married till you were 18, because there was, of course, they attacked us with the stereotype of pedophilia. But Stan, you could not have had a better representative of the Freedom to Marry's advocacy than Stan and Peter, and Stan in particular because of his gifts, and they were gifts. I'd say the thing that comes to my mind when I think of Stan in all the different ways that I knew him, he was a good man. He was a good man. He knew in his heart what it meant to love another man. He knew, to be honest, he knew what it had meant to have loved his wife, Priscilla. It was not a matter of negativity. It was him growing into a new realization of his own being. I had the privilege to know him during that process. And I think we in the legislature were incredibly fortunate, of course, to have Beth Robinson and Susan Murray and Mary Bonato, to have
Those were the attorneys.
the attorneys for the Freedom to Marry case before the Supreme Court. For me to have Tom Little, Representative Tom Little, who was the chair of the Judiciary Committee, and by the way, happened to also be the chancellor of the Vermont Episcopal Diocese. And so their lives became intertwined more and more as Stan became a deacon in the church. I will say one thing, I'm debating whether to say this publicly or not, but some of us have joked about it over the years, and I'm just gonna, we used to say, because I knew Stan when he was a Quaker. I knew him when he was married to Priscilla.
Okay.
I hired Stan at the Counseling Service of Addison County and Priscilla as play therapists. They had run a children's program. Then they'd gone to graduate school and become play therapists, and were known to have just incredible talent and skills. We were fortunate to hire them. They were members of the Quaker Meeting at the time. And then over a period of time, Stan came out as a gay man. And eventually he became part of the Episcopal Diocese. And some of us said, I don't know which was more shocking. Stan moving from being a Quaker in the smells and bells of the Episcopal Church, or coming out as a gay man. Because seriously, I mean, I had deep respect for his commitment as a deacon. Although I interacted with him far less in that role during my time, but
he was always a Quaker.
But there was always
Deep down.
there was a part of him that and I think you've each articulated it, or you've articulated it well.
And say more about what the plaintiffs could do that you couldn't do as a legislator.
What did
they do?
And I'm focusing on Stan, not to give acknowledgement and credit to the other litigants, but there is a way in which, just historically, gay men get targeted with homophobia in a nastier way sometimes than lesbian women. Yeah. It's the masculinity issues for many men in the world, and so Stan and Peter really got targeted. They got targeted online, and I knew that and because I got targeted as well, I knew the courage that it took for Stan and Peter to put themselves out there. And they, they were unflinching in their. They were unflinching, and Stan, I can hear him saying it. This is because I love Peter. Yeah. This is because I love this man. This is not because we're trying to we don't have an agenda. Our agenda is that when we love someone of the same sex, we should have all the rights and privileges that come with that.
Yes, yeah. And there were a lot of risks, weren't there? I mean, you said they were targeted, but there were real risks to them. There were different kinds of risks to the legislators, I think, but certainly to Stan and Peter, there were real
there were absolutely there were risks, and they were called upon to speak. They were called upon to be, along with their colleagues, the fellow litigants, they were the face of Freedom to Marry, as much as Beth and Susan were the attorneys working here in Vermont. You couldn't get around the fact that the six of them who chose to be litigants put themselves on the line, and I know that they receive threats, and I constantly was admiring their courage. I have to say there were times, this is a part of a bigger story, but I came to understand that we created civil unions. It was not at all clear that the litigants and the attorneys would support it. They struggled, and they struggled.
Because they wanted marriage.
Because they wanted marriage. I made a commitment to stay there until we got full marriage equality, and Stan and Peter continued to be that presence as well from the time we passed civil unions in 2000 until we passed marriage equality in 2009. It was, for me, I became the chair of the Judiciary Committee at that point, and to have Stan and Peter and Beth and Susan and the other litigants be part of that ongoing steady presence was essential.
Yeah. Well, and just to fill in the story as to what happened legally, so Vermont passed the Civil Unions bill in 2000, and then there really was a cascading effect around same-sex marriage. So there was some back and forth between the Massachusetts Supreme Court and their legislature, but eventually they achieved marriage equality in 2004. Then Connecticut in 2008, and Iowa in 2009, and then marriage equality became effective in Vermont in 2009. But there was an interesting process because the legislature approved it, and then Governor Douglas vetoed it, and there had to be an override of the veto, which there was. So that requires a 2/3 majority. So that was a big deal. And that meant then that Vermont became the first state to establish marriage equality by a legislative vote rather than a state Supreme Court decision. And then, just to kind of round it out, in 2015, the United States Supreme Court ruled that gay marriage had to be recognized throughout the nation. So it was that beginning in 1999 really sent the dominoes falling.
And can I note for the historical record that Beth Robinson argued the case before the Vermont Supreme Court. Susan Murray was her colleague, both from Lang Roxbury and Middlebury. Mary Bonato was from the Gay and Lesbian Defenders in Boston and helped craft the arguments. Mary Bonato went on to argue the case before the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. She argued the case before the Connecticut Supreme Court, and it was Mary Bonato who argued the case before the U.S. Supreme Court. So there's a direct lineage, a direct line from the legal arguments that were set in motion in Vermont in 2000, which resulted in civil unions. But then they built upon that because they realized they had not argued that the status of marriage was equally important to the rights and privileges. And they integrated that then into the arguments in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and then ultimately the U.S. Supreme Court. So I'm very proud that Mary Bonato, who is, some people have referred to her as the Thurgood Marshall of the LGBTQ community because he had argued the civil rights cases at the U.S. Supreme Court. And but again, Stan was a constant presence throughout all of the legal churnings, and as I say, and then used it to integrate it in his work, particularly as a deacon. He and Tom Little both were on the national work together nationally, as you said, and I'm aware that Stan had a profound impact on numbers of people as a deacon, and I was less involved there, but I've heard stories, important stories from others.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much, Bill, for that history, and that's probably the thing that Stan is most known for, but I also wanted to assert a privilege as a host and a friend of Stan's to talk a little bit about how I had known him. He certainly didn't end his activism, after the civil unions when. My experience of him was, as Susan had mentioned, through Vermont Interfaith Action, which is an organization that is made up of different congregations throughout the state, and the Cathedral Church of St. Paul has been a very active member from the very beginning. And Stan was sort of the liaison from the staff to VIA. So he and I got to meet together with other folks from the cathedral once a month, and we employed a grassroots kind of bottom-up process to choose issues. And during the time that I worked with him, first we focused on getting transportation to one of the health care clinics in the county, and then we focused for many years on reforming our corrections system, so people who are in prison. And Stan was just such a wonderful, steady presence at all these meetings. I kind of laughed, Simon, when you talked about him writing things. He took the notes. Here he was, even as an archdeacon, he took the notes for the meeting because he was so good at it.
Happily.
I know he did. He enjoyed. He always volunteered for
Yes,
it every meeting. And he was, I would say that he had wise, not just smart things to say about the issues and about our strategy for trying to make change. He was strategic, but he also he always brought his heart of faith to everything as well. So he always brought it around to why should our strategy should reflect what we believe as as people of faith, and the love and the compassion and the justice that we're trying to advance in the world. He had a caring heart for incarcerated people, as you said, people that other people might consider to be, on the margins and maybe not as deserving as others, but he had a real heart for them. And then, in practical ways, he certainly helped the organization, and I was very grateful as the executive director. He brought visibility to VIA at the cathedral and in the wider community. He helped us navigate obtaining grants, and you have to do fundraising. So he was always very cognizant of that and helpful about that. And also, I remember one big memory I have of him is I persuaded him. He was so busy and involved in so many other councils and committees and things, but he took the time to go to a clergy gathering that of the national network that VIA belonged to, and it was in New Orleans. But he liked that.
That must have been hard on him.
Yeah, right, exactly. As you've all said, he liked to have fun. So, and I can still remember sitting across from him eating oysters at a place near our hotel in New Orleans. He really had such impact, and we did accomplish some things in especially around the incarceration process, and we concentrated on preparation for release for quite a bit, and family programs for mothers, incarcerated women, having a relationship with their children. And then more recently, we contributed to the discussion about whether there should be a new women's prison or not, which the legislature and the Department of Corrections is still struggling with. But he, many of the things that everybody else has said. I would also add, I think he had such a mellifluous voice, right? And so he almost always read our research report. He presented it when we had our big public actions, and he had the perfect ability to read it fast enough but not too fast, because it was always kind of jam packed. And I'd say, Stan, we've got to get it done in 15 minutes, and he was great at that.
Can I add,
Sure, yeah, please do.
a friend of mine said that she loved his voice so much she would listen to him read the telephone book.
That's great. Yes. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, and I would invite you to have any of the things that other people have said brought up new memories for you, or anything else you'd like to share about him.
I'm just struck by the intersection of like how his work in all areas like just mixes together, right? And I was thinking of a memory. I worked with a person for a long time who inevitably was dying, and I went to this person up at UVM Medical Center, and you know, I was sitting with this person. You know, it was his last day, and guess who walks in the room? You know, Stan, right? Stan in his role as a deacon walks in the room, and he's like, and it's a no-brainer. You know, it's like, oh hey Stan, like of course you're here, right? Of course you show up like an angel here in this moment. You know. And you know, it's just, he was so much to so many people.
Absolutely.
And it struck me that when I knew him, he was doing all of these things, and he never showed up harried or rushed, or rarely showed up harried or rushed, and then he was with you, even though all of these other things were happening all the time. And you know, and he didn't deny it, but he was, when he was there, he was there.
Yeah, so many times, so I'm just remembering, you know, there'd be something that we would need help with, and we'd say, "Where's Stan? Where's Stan? Where's Stan?" You know, and no matter what Stan was doing, if he was in the middle of something, or certainly with somebody, he would finish, and then he was always made himself available. And one of the things that was so wonderful about his work with other people was he always, if one came to him and said, "We have, you know, can you help me think through this?" He would always ask, "Well, what do you think?" He was not, and that, I remember one of the first times he said that to me, or asked me that. It was like, whoa, I'm coming to you, right, for your expertise to guide me. And he just was such a partner. You know, he just included anyone he was working with in his thinking, and just that partnership. And it was so wonderful. It was so safe. It was so trusting. It was so educational. Really lovely.
It really speaks to, like, that idea speaks to one of his like kind of core philosophies, that like people have the capacity to grow and change within them. And like approaching people with curiosity versus expertise, right? And that is so much a part of what I saw in my connection with Stan.
Very, very, very obvious.
That curiosity.
The last time I saw Stan was at a demonstration outside the Federal Building with his collar on, and it made perfect sense that he was there.
Of course.
And Enrique, my spouse Enrique, and I went up and greeted him, and it was, just like, of course, this is the place that you would want and need to be.
Great. Well, finally, we'll close with a few words from Stan's partner and husband of 32 years, Peter Harrigan.
Peter, thank you so much for joining me. And first of all, please let me share my sincerest condolences to you. It's a terrible loss, and my heart really goes out to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I've been so grateful for the support I've received from every corner over the last couple of months.
Oh, yes. Well, yeah, Stan was much loved, and you were much loved as well. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
So actually, I would like to start off by asking you how did you two meet, and what did you see in each other at the beginning?
Well, we met through a mutual friend, Dave Landers, who I knew and worked with for many years at St. Michael's College, introduced us, and I think I was immediately struck by Stan's just kind of openness and generosity. When he retired from or left his position at the Counseling Service of Addison County, CSAC, someone in a tribute said, "You never have to wonder who he really is," because there was kind of a genuineness in him and sort of an immediacy and sort of no pretense. He just sort of was who he was. And that was, to everyone, this very sort of open, generous, caring person who, made every interaction, whether it was a relationship, through Vermont Interfaith Action or therapeutic relationship with his clients, sort of made everyone feel at ease and feel just able to be more fully themselves. And I would say if there was any gift that Stan gave me in our relationship, it was, and there were many, it was the ability to sort of be fully myself and, step forward in my career and have a doll collection and, you name it, all the different, like, let all of the different aspects of me really flower. And I'm finding in the, messages I've received and conversations that I'm having that he was doing that everywhere, in so many different interactions that I was not aware of, and really did care deeply for the people around him, friends, family, and strangers. So that's a very it's a very attractive thing in a person.
So true, so true.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you two went on to become quite well known for your participation in the lawsuit that led to the civil unions law, not just here in Vermont. And really, that had an impact across the nation because there was quite a cascading effect.
Yeah.
Did you have any inkling at the beginning of your relationship, or I guess maybe at what point in your relationship did you begin to realize that you were going to be embroiled in sort of one of these big civil rights fights in history?
It was interesting because we started out just kind of like everybody else, and what's the word? Didn't know exactly where we were going, but it seemed like within a few months we were fairly committed to each other. Um, I think our first sort of big step together was buying a townhouse, which I'm still in. It's been 29 years now, and at that point, we felt like we kind of had been officially married by the Chase Manhattan Bank, just all of those papers that we signed. And it was around that time that we met. Well, we knew Joseph Watson from Middlebury, who was one of the founders of the Vermont Freedom to Marry Task Force, and they actually invited Stan to be the narrator of a video that they were making. I have the VHS downstairs, and it was a 17-minute video called "The Freedom to Marry: A Green Mountain View," and Joseph liked, as many people did, Stan's sort of smooth, therapeutic voice, and so he said, "Will you be the narrator?" And since I'm a theater director, Stan practiced his lines with me, and we I don't know. In the 90s, what's the word? Marriage wasn't necessarily like on the front burner for anyone. We were sort of fighting for more basic things, and sort of just barely sort of pulling out of the AIDS pandemic. So the idea of shoring up our place wasn't necessarily what was on people's minds. But as we sort of looked at the issues that were represented in the video and thought about our own lives, we thought, wow, this would be an amazing thing, and this is an important thing. And if there were a way, to support this, that that would be a good thing to do. And maybe because we have job security, we have some financial security, we have the support of our family and friends, maybe we are able to step forward in a way that other people perhaps are not.
Well, and it turned out to be quite a long haul through the legislature here in Vermont, which people weren't especially expecting. They thought maybe the Supreme Court would solve it more quickly,
Yeah.
and then of course the struggle went on to other states and everything. It did. And I understand that there were certainly threats and risks to you and to the legislators, to everybody who was involved in the process, right?
Yeah.
How did that affect your relationship? Were those big challenges
Well, I think a lot of that stuff really just brought us closer, and we were, more uh, uh, connected to each other and more sort of like as people challenge you, you get a deeper sense of the protections that you need. So all of that really just cemented really our desire to try to move move things forward and get some protections. It was disappointing that marriage wasn't a possibility in 2000, but we were really grateful that something of substance that would help people in Vermont, could happen, and really grateful for everyone's support in making that happen.
Well, I guess finally, what I'd like to especially bring out is what is it that you hope that people will remember about Stan, not just as not in his various roles. We've tried
Yeah,
to
yeah,
cover that with other folks, but as a man, as a human being.
yeah. One of his cousins, a first cousin of his, who lives in Washington, D.C., who wasn't able to attend Stan's funeral, although many, many family members were, said that he, in his mind, Stan was without bitterness.
Mm.
And I thought, what an amazing thing. And I thought, I think he's right. And I just thought, you know, how how could I be in the world without bitterness? What would that mean? Um, that, the idea that you really um, give people the benefit of the doubt, trust in their goodness, and maybe help them discover that, on some basic level, and even just that you listen. I think, going back to the civil union debate, we would read all these, sort of horrible letters to the editor. And Stan's encouragement was always not to demonize other people just because we don't agree with them. And I think that that's another thing going forward, like a lot more listening, and a lot less judgment. And clearly, there are places where you need to draw your line in the sand, and sort of, push back. But I think with Stan, there was a friendliness and a politeness to that, and I think and a warmth to that, which I think we can all, including me, kind of remember and try to embody.
Indeed, yes. Well, thank you so much. It's a privilege to know Stan, and it's been an honor to speak with you today. Thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
talking
Thanks.
with me.
Thanks for putting this together.
Our video tribute has tried to present the array of activities that Stan was engaged in: LGBTQ plus rights, other forms of social justice, psychotherapy for adolescents and for those on the autism spectrum, ministry, and the Episcopal Church. And we hope that we have done him justice. So my thanks again to Bill Lippert, Susan McMillan, Sima Breiterman, Xander Lodge, and Peter Harrigan. I'm Debbie Ingram. On behalf of Town Meeting TV, we hope this has been a fitting tribute during Pride Month here in Vermont to Stan Baker.